Hey everyone, we're just waiting for everyone to join and then we'll kind of kick off. So we'll give it about 5 minutes to let people get into the meeting and then we'll start.
Hi everyone. Apologies about. Right. Can you all hear me? I'll just see if you can nodding your head, some of you. I don't know how many. There's 35 participants. Sorry for the delay. I didn't have the links actually to the meeting, so I really apologise for that. That I wasn't able to log on. I've been desperately trying to find the Zoom links. So yeah, so finally we're here. So we're going to be running, hopefully not too late. So my name's Kathy O'Connor. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to start with showing you, and actually I think you're going to have to make me co-host, Liv or Emily or whoever set up the Zoom meeting, because I don't think
I've made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I am going to open up my email. Right. Can I do that? Right. So, right, I'm going to actually turn off my camera because I don't think all of you are going to really want to be staring at me as I'm kind of going and trying to work out what I'm trying to do. And so there's going to be, but before I do, I'll just introduce myself, and there's going to be some interactions, and I'm going to ask you to kind of hopefully interact with me a little bit on the whiteboard and also in the chat box. So I'll try my best to do some kind of response and some kind of discussions over that. And then at the end, what we'll do is we'll have kind of a question and answer where you can unmute yourself and ask questions, or we might do kind of a hands up sort of thing that we can use, I think, on Zoom. So I'm just going to start by introducing myself. My name is Kathy O'Connor. I'm one of the wellbeing consultants or counsellors. And one of my other roles is widening participation, where I actually work with students and people around the university to try and help students sort of engage in their learning and get the best out of their learning, and especially people with sort of disabilities and mental health issues. So it's about sort of access and success as well. So that's my role, and I've been asked to come along and do some of this training for all you amazing people who've decided to volunteer as sort of welfare officers or welfare support people, which I think's a really incredible thing that you're doing, and I think it's actually a really helpful thing in the current situation at the moment, but also I think generally that sort of peer support is invaluable, and there's a lot of research around it, and it's really proved to be invaluable. So I think you're all quite amazing that you're willing to kind of give up your time to do this sort of thing. So welcome, thank you. So I'm going to turn off my screen now, and I'm going to hand you over actually to Liv, who's going to kind of do a little bit of other introductions and talk about the role of the sort of wellbeing officers, and then I'll come back, if that's okay, Liv, and then I'll come back to the next part of the training. Okay. Is that okay, Liv? Did you want to do something about the role of the wellbeing officer?
Your mic's not working, Liv.
Oh, my mic's not working.
No, Liv's mic's not working.
Oh, Liv's mic's not working. Okay.
She's going to rejoin and rejoin, but I can start going through it.
Okay, would you
and
like
then Liv
to?
can take over. Yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'll let you guys do this bit.
Cool. So with society's kind of introducing the role of wellbeing officer, we kind of started to look at what that role description would be. So this is kind of what we defined as. So you've got 10 specific welfare related training to fulfill the role. Act as a point of contact to signpost society members to appropriate welfare services. Liv, are you back? No, it's not working.
No.
Actively listen to members when they bring up welfare concerns and signpost appropriately without giving advice. Work with VP Welfare and Diversity to disseminate key messages relating to welfare and diversity amongst society members. Work with the executive committee to ensure wellbeing and accessibility is considered an event planning and society activity. Keep up to date with the information provided by us regarding signposts to services available for members to access, and then being supported by your committee to deliver the role. So the role is very much kind of having all the knowledge to then signpost your members to the relevant services that they can get support from, and also kind of having the skills to be able to actively listen as well. So Kathy's going to kind of go through a lot of the knowledge and skills that you'll need to kind of fulfill that role. And then hopefully by the end of this, you'll all feel more equipped to kind of deliver that role that you've been elected into.
Okay. So shall I just take over from here then?
Yeah, if you're happy to.
Okay, cool. So, right. So I thought one of the first things that we could do, I'm just trying to see if I can move the slide. First of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about the contents, what I'm going to include in this particular webinar and this training. So we're just going to start off with a little quiz and looking at some of the mental health myths and thinking about sort of, I guess, our own attitudes to mental health, which is always really useful to kind of become aware of, because, oh, sorry, that just went the wrong way. It's always useful to become aware of our own kind of filter on the world and our own attitudes to mental health, because that actually affects how we reach out to people. Then I'm going to do a little bit about communication and listening skills. So I hope you won't find it too like patronizing or anything, but it's just there's sort of certain ways that we can kind of keep conversations flowing and get people to really open up to us, and also then help them sort of direct them, point them in the right direction and support them. We're going to also look at boundaries and confidentialities, which is really helpful in this situation, because you might be faced with a lot of different kind of distress and problems and issues that the other students and peers might be approaching you with. We'll touch on what to do in a crisis. So we're going to look at what happens if somebody discloses intentions of suicide or self-harm or anything like that. And of course, the final bit, we're going to look at managing your own mental health and well-being, which is hugely important when you're faced with sometimes some of this information and people approaching you for support. And at the end, I'll give you some resources that you can have a look at and obviously, you know, get back to us about as well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, if I can find the poll, which I thought there was a poll. So let me find it. Okay. Where is the poll? I'm really sorry. I'm just, I've used this and for some reason I can't seem to find the poll. So not to worry, I am going to just ask some questions, and what I will do is I'll actually put on the whiteboard, I'll share the whiteboard, and I'll get you ready to put in yes or no if you can. I know there's quite a few of you, there's 40 of us pretty much. So, but if you can, I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'm going to get you to write down if it's a myth or a fact. Okay, so my first one, so sorry I couldn't do it in the poll, and I don't know why I can't seem to find the poll in there, but not to worry. I'd like you to pop down on the whiteboard, if you've all got it, whether this is a myth or a fact. Mental health problems are rare. So if you could just pop it in, you should be able to kind of go to the top of the whiteboard and pop in there whether you consider it a myth or a fact. And you might want to, you could also pop it in the chat box if that's a bit easier. So the question is, mental health problems are rare. Is that a myth or a fact? So I've already got, about 5, 10, 15. Yeah, and lots of people are saying it's a myth. So that's brilliant. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I am going to clear all of this, clear all drawings, and we're going to do the next one. So people can recover from mental health illnesses. Is that a myth or a fact? People can make full recoveries from a mental health illness, or a mental illness, should I say. Myth or a fact? Okay, and I'm noticing so many people again are writing down fact that they are. So, and yeah, that's great, and I appreciate that. So basically, you know, mental health actually affects sort of 1 in 4 people a year in any 1 year. That's the statistic. But many people can and do recover from mental health problems. And often they'll need professional help, but sometimes, you know, it's alongside actually support from friends, families, and peers. And that really kind of aids in recovery. Okay, so I'm going to clear this once again. So clear all drawings, and I'm going to ask another one. The stigma and discrimination around a mental illness can be more difficult than the illness itself. Is that a myth or a fact? So the stigma and discrimination around a mental health illness or a mental illness can be more difficult than the illness itself. Myth or a fact? And again, I'm noticing lots of people writing fact, true, yeah. Okay. So most people are noticing that that's actually a fact, and it's true. And that's sort of interesting, worth considering, that in a recent survey, and I've taken this from the Mind website, 58% of people say that the stigma and discrimination is equally as damaging or harder to deal with than the actual illness itself. So that's a kind of a really interesting thing to consider. And finally, just one more question, one more quiz. Shame we couldn't do this as a poll, but one day I'll get that all sorted. Finally, people with mental health difficulties will always tell family or friends first. What do you think? Is that a myth or a fact? So again, type it. Well, it looks like most of you are very well informed in this. It's really, you know, that's great to kind of see that you're all obviously fairly interested in this area, and you've sort of thought about it. So yeah, most of you have written myth, and that's brilliant. And it says that you know, when they've interviewed people and taken statistics, it sometimes takes people over a year, apparently, to tell family members or friends, and they're actually more likely to tell a stranger or someone in a kind of a professional caring role before they approach family or friends. So that puts you often in a very unique position in kind of supporting and signposting people, you know, in this role. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our, let me go back to the PowerPoint. Hopefully I'll be able to do it. So I'm going to do it from beginning. Okay, so that was our poll. So it's just really interesting to notice, really, you know, about some of the stigma, how it affects people, how they're likely to approach people that they're strangers or only know a little bit about their mental health, and also just about the fact that actually, you know, the support and the signposting with help, you know, we can stay really positive about recovery from any mental health issues. So, you know, that's really good to see that most of you have kind of thought about it. I'm going to ask you again, I'm sorry to keep doing this, but in the whiteboard, but I kind of want to really get a little bit of sort of interaction going. But again, in the whiteboard or in the chat box, I'd like you to just put a few comments or words about what made you come to this role, what made you volunteer for this particular role. So what are some of the reasons or underlying reasons, what made you decide to become a wellbeing officer? Is anyone willing to share that? Either on the chat box or you can go onto the whiteboard. Interested, somebody's written interested in mental well-being. So you have an interest in sort of, yeah, the kind of mental health and in well-being as well. What else? What other reasons has brought people in? Somebody's written to create a safe and inclusive environment for everyone in your society. Okay, yeah, so you want to be very inclusive, you want to support people. Other people are writing, wanted to support peers going through difficult times. Yeah, that's fantastic. Somebody else has written you're interested in giving something back to the university community, and now you're in your 4th year and you want to help some of the younger years, the people who are kind of coming behind you with your experience, which may be useful. And that's fantastic, because we're going to talk a little bit as well about sharing our own experiences. And somebody's written it's a combination of desire to help your fellow society members as well as first and second hand experience in mental health issues. Yeah, so again, you're having your own experience and being able to use that to help and support other people. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Anybody else have any other kind of comments or reasons you decide to volunteer? Somebody says empowering my peers to be resilient to the ups and downs throughout their lives. And again, I love that, because that's already kind of preempting, because we're going to look at kind of empowering relationships and things like that. So, you know, there's something about, yeah, giving people, you know, empowering people and being there and supporting them and helping to be resilient, because resilience is something that, you know, we need to kind of build on and develop, but it's so important in our lives. So thank you. I really appreciate you all sharing that. And you can keep writing if you want to share any more, and I'll try and keep responding. I'm not kind of using your names, and I hope you don't mind, but the reason that I'm not using your names is just because we're recording this, and so, you know, you may not be particularly want to necessarily be identified in this, or I'm just apologizing, but my for some reason this window's getting in the way here, but okay. So one of the things that I want to kind of talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, that this was kind of one of the areas that we're going to look at, was looking at sort of frames of reference. So frames of reference, as you can see, it's kind of the way that we think and feel about our own and others, even mental health issues, but other things in our lives. So it's kind of that window on the world that we have. So basically, it's our attitudes and our beliefs and the way that they're influenced by a whole range of issues. So as you can see on that slide, you know, they can be influenced by our education, by our upbringing, by cultural influences. You know, there's so many things that can kind of influence our window on the world, and therefore influence the way we kind of view mental health issues. And this is developed by Jackie and Aaron Sheaf to refer to our kind of filters on reality, if you like. And the fact that we all see things differently also means that we may treat others, you know, and ourselves differently as well. So it's really important to really have a think about and be aware of your own frame of reference or your own window on the world, because it's only through that awareness that you can actually start kind of noticing how it's influencing you and perhaps and how, you know, it's influencing your actions and your responses. So I'd like you to kind of have a bit of a think about, just in your own kind of head, thinking about your own frame of reference. How do you think it might kind of impact on you and some of the situations or events and your perception? So I wonder if you're willing to write in the chat box, how do you think, thinking about your own frame of reference, how do you think that they could influence you and how you might respond to other people's difficulties, or how you might respond to situations? Is anyone willing to kind of share that in the chat box? So, perhaps you might have, grown up in a family or been brought up in a family where, men are told, to just get over it or pull up their socks, or not just men, but maybe your whole family might have that attitude of sort of, oh, let's just get over it, stiff upper lip. It's a very British thing, isn't it? That, I'll stiff upper lip and just get on with it. Or, a lot of messages we get, for example, societal messages are things about turn a frown upside down, or just stiff upper lip too, and that can really kind of have an influence on how we kind of respond to other people's difficulties and stress. So I wonder if any of you are willing to share any other kind of things that you feel might kind of affect your own kind of window on the world. So I can see most of you being a little bit reticent about this. And there's no, because one of the things, it's about kind of sharing and being open here. There's no right or wrong about this. This isn't about pointing the finger at anyone. It's just about, really discussing, what is it that you think might get in the way. It's a kind of an awareness. So thank you so much. Somebody's written, assume that some experiences are the same as yours. Yeah, fantastic. So, because if you've already had your own kind of mental health or mental illness experiences, you might just make some assumptions that the other people are pretty much, having the same experience. Somebody's written your previous experience encounters with mental health and well-being. Yeah. So, you might have had some encounters, and again, from there, you might interpret that everyone's, going to be responding or feeling or behaving in the same way, or, seeking the same sort of support. So yeah, so absolutely one of the frame of references. So I might just go back to the page before. So some of it might be previous experiences and how people have responded to how you've approached them and helped them. Anything else? In some, cultures and societies, mental health isn't, or mental illness isn't kind of easily talked about. So that's going to have a real influence about how we view it. Somebody's written, I'm from a fairly diverse social and familial background, and certain preconceptions and prejudices about others, and consequently sensitivity to them, are sometimes quite alien to me. Yeah, and I think, that is so open and honest, and I really appreciate that, because, we can't help, it's never about blame. It's just about, where we come from, but it's only from that awareness that sometimes our own prejudices and preconceptions can be, quite, difficult. But once we're aware of them, then we can actually respond differently or do something about them. We can kind of hold them lightly and notice them, and perhaps kind of get in touch with how we would like to respond, how we, would like to see, see the world slightly differently. So I really appreciate that. There's so many things, that actually affect the way we view mental health, mental health and mental illness. I keep saying mental health illness, but it's actually mental illness. So apologies. So thank you for those who are sharing. And again, please just keep writing, as we go along, and because it just opens up kind of some thought and conversations about, how we're going to how you approach this role, really. And somebody's just actually written, working as a health and social care worker showed me what life in old age can involve. I wouldn't appreciate how important looking after yourself when you're young impacts the long-term effects without experience that. Yeah. So it's again that experience, coming from that sort of a place of, past experiences of looking after your own health, and the importance that you're realizing now, sort of looking back. And so that's kind of given you a different window on the world, coming from a different, I guess, age bracket, and having different experiences too. So, I think that's really helpful some of these things. So it is awareness. So sometimes our window on the world is a very positive thing because it gives us a different outlook, but sometimes our frames of reference can sometimes kind of hold us back a little bit, or perhaps even skew our view of the world if we haven't kind of become aware of it a little bit. So, that's really helpful. So one of the things that we're sort of looking at is how do we approach others? So, what are the sort of basic concepts of approaching others? And like I say, most of you have come here because you really want to support other people, and that's kind of some of your underlying values. But it's kind of useful to think of these main starting points, these 3 starting points when we're trying to make connections and try and approach others. So it's about being accepting. So acceptance is kind of respecting the other person's feelings and their experiences and their values, even though they might be different from ours. So like someone said earlier, coming from a different and diverse social and familial background, you might have slightly different kind of conceptions or preconceptions and kind of a view on the world. But if we can accept other people's view on the world, then, and we don't judge or criticize them because of our own beliefs and attitudes, then, it's a way to kind of make that connection with others, to approach others. Genuineness. I mean, it sounds, obvious, but, often showing that we really accept that person and we value them and we're actually genuine about wanting to understand and how we feel really goes a long way as well. So it's that kind of, approaching someone with that openness and curiosity and being kind of really authentic and self-aware. And finally, empathy. So empathy, as we know, it's not sympathy, it's not feeling sorry for someone, but it's kind of like being able to place ourselves in the other person's shoes and kind of demonstrate that we understand what they're saying, and what and perhaps, what they're experiencing and how they're feeling. So it's kind of getting on their wavelength, and we don't have to have experienced what they have in order to empathize. So it's a good starting point, and it's a good sort of way to remember age. Acceptance, genuineness, and empathy are really kind of a good starting point. So some of the tips, these are kind of just general things, and I'm going to fly through some of these things, but and some of these might be really obvious, but the reason I've put them in there is because sometimes maybe they're things that we haven't really kind of thought about at times. And so some of the tips that for talking about mental health with others can be, first and foremost, setting time aside to do that with no distractions. So it's really actually, giving that person that time and then that space to share what's going on. Allowing that person that you're trying to support or you're connecting with or who's approached you, giving them as much time, giving them the time to share, but letting them share as much or little as they choose. It's not necessarily your role to be kind of prompting and getting them to tell you more and more, but just kind of being there and letting that person know that you're there to listen can really open up avenues, maybe not at that time, but at another time when they feel a bit safer to open up a little bit more. It's really important in our roles that we're not trying to diagnose and we're not trying to guess their feelings. We're doing the listening and we're trying to just empathize and understand and then kind of open up maybe some dialogue and then try and find out what would be most helpful to them. And we're going to get on to how we're going to kind of do that with them as best we can without being kind of pushy or really probing too much. So we're going to keep questions open-ended. We're going to talk more on this later. We're going to do some reflective listening. So that's that listening carefully and summarizing. And we're going to look at how we're going to signpost them and help them in seeking support. And of course, knowing your limits. And this was very much about what I think it was Emily that said earlier in the role of a wellbeing officer, we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries and what is your role and what isn't your role. And that's really important, not only for your own well-being, but also for, for their expectations and managing their expectations too. So sometimes okay. So it's interesting to look at this fixer relationship versus kind of an empowerer. And because often we can fall into this because often when you volunteer for these sort of roles where you really want to support and help other people and guide them, help them become more resilient, we can sometimes, our natural instinct is to kind of fix, to try and, you know, solve their problems, because obviously we really want to help them, and it's sort of a natural human instinct to fall into that role, but actually sometimes that can be a bit unhelpful. So I'm going to ask you again, if you can, if you're willing to put in the chat box, kind of maybe a little bit of a comment. Just first of all, think about a time when you've actually spoken to a friend or a family member about a problem, or about something that's worried you, and all of a sudden they've started to tell you what to do. So all of a sudden they started to actually advise you and tell you, you know, this is what you should be doing, blah, 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 blah. And so what I'd like you to put in the chat box, how did that feel when that person, when you wanted to speak to them and they just started telling you exactly what you should do? Is anyone willing to write in the chat box? How does that feel? And I'm sure we've all had those experiences where often you just want to perhaps, you know, open up and talk to someone, you know, process some of your emotions, get something off your chest, and they've turned around straight away and given you advice and tell you what to do. Thank you. And somebody's written, yeah, it's patronizing. It feels really patronizing. Some people have written it's unconvinced that their advice, well, thank you, a lot of you, unconvinced that their advice is relevant to your situation. Yeah, so at that moment they might not even understand and you don't know if it's relevant. Somebody's written, it feels like they're not willing to listen to what you're saying. Yeah, because they're already in their head problem solving. And so you do start wondering if they're actually listening. You know, that's a really good point. Somebody's written, as though they don't really understand where I was coming from by giving the generic answer to the issues. Yeah, because often people kind of either pick up on kind of these generic answers, this is what you should do, or they might be actually giving you advice from their own perspective, which might not be helpful to you because they might not even understand because they haven't tried to. Somebody else has said you feel like they're not listening to your problem. Yeah, and I think that that's often what happens because people looks like that they're kind of just already in their head doing the solutions. Somebody's written, it makes your position seem trivial, so you want to stop talking. Yeah, so interestingly, when people start offering that advice and start telling you what to do, it actually makes you withdraw and not want to share anymore, because you feel like your problem's being trivialized. Other people saying like they don't really know what you're going through yet because they're already making assumptions without listening and asking. And somebody else has written, you get tired, exasperated, feels a bit dismissive of what you've said, not sure if they've listened properly, frustrating. It's more helpful when they ask whether you just want someone to talk to advice. Yeah. And so, you know, obviously a lot of us have had that experience, you know, where, and I'm, you know, I'm a counselor and often, you know, even in my family, people come to me and sometimes, you know, without thinking, I might start offering advice and, you know, and I know that people come back to me and go, but I just want you to listen. I don't want that advice. And so I think that's such an important thing. You know, it's kind of one of the things we're going to do in today's session is to kind of work out when is it that we want to signpost and offer them some support, and when's a good time to offer any advice, if at all. So thanks so much for sharing that. I think that's, you know, really, really helpful, kind of just looking at, you know, what is it, you know, that how does that feel when people just sort of go straight in with telling us what to do, advice. So that's the kind of difference between this kind of helper type relationship or fixer versus mutually empowering relationship. So, you know, the helper or the fixer, if you like, sets yourself up or that person up as an expert. So when I'm giving advice and when I'm telling someone what to do, then I seem like I'm the expert, and it's problem focused, and yeah, there's an imbalance. So there's a power inequality there, and it also encourages dependence. You know, it's very disempowering, and so by that I mean that people often don't tap into their own resources, which often they need to do in order to, you know, I guess look for solutions or actually find a way through kind of mental health difficulties. And it sounds something like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. You know, this is what I would do to deal with it. So it's kind of those sort of comments. Whereas when we have mutually empowering relationships, it's allowing that person to become an expert of their own experience and also the expert of their own solutions. So, you know, it goes on more of an equal footing. And I think it's even in counseling. I'm not the expert, you know, we don't know everything. It's just about allowing people to explore something and then becoming the experts of their own issues and their own ways forward. And so it encourages that kind of independence and empowering. So, you know, it sounds something like, I can imagine that must be really hard for you. You know, I'd like to find out more and maybe kind of work out what might be the best way forward. So, you know, that's kind of the real difference in this the difference between a fixer and a mutually empowering kind of a relationship. So we're going to now talk a little bit about kind of communication styles. And the first part that we're going to look at is sort of verbal and non-verbal skills. So, you know, please feel free at any point to, you know, ask a question, and I'll try and keep up the chat box. And so, you know, any questions, please go ahead and type them in there, and I'll try and keep an eye on it and respond as I'm going along. So an effective method, and this is used, so this OARS is actually used in many areas like motivational interviewing, and it's used at the Maudsley Clinic for people with eating disorders and things like that. So they look at kind of these communication styles, and OARS is a really good way to think of these ways of communicating. And it kind of keeps the conversation, when we keep these ways of communicating in mind, it keeps the conversations reflective and mindful. So, and we talk about it with OARS because it helps us kind of row the conversation in the direction that we want it to go. And so rather than kind of drifting along and letting some people just offloading when that's not helpful, or, you know, or us kind of getting into this kind of advisory place and things like that, if we remember this basic communication skill called OARS, then it's really helpful. So we start with, what we're about to start with is open questions. So we learn about skillful questioning styles, affirmations about, you know, picking out green shoots and affirming some of their strengths and qualities. Reflective listening we're going to look at. So it's skillful listening, you know, really listening, not just with your ears. And summarizing, it's about showing people how we've understood and getting clarification whether we've understood as well. So it's just really important to kind of work on these kind of communication skills. And a good way, like I say, to remember it is using this term OARS. So just constantly having problems getting to the next slide. So sorry if I'm kind of sometimes stuttering a bit and don't know what I'm doing, because I'm just trying to get to that next slide and it just won't move along. So okay, so the first thing we're looking at is types of questions. So we've got closed questions and open questions. So closed questions are ones that are kind of defined, you know, the answer to a closed question is either yes or no, or now or later. It's just basically a very kind of a defined answer that you want. So are you feeling depressed will only gauge yes or no. You know, are you okay? Yes or no. You know, those sort of, they're closed questions, and they don't allow for elaboration or exploration. Open questions, on the other hand, allow the person to kind of give their point of view. They kind of, and they help us increase our understanding of what the difficulty is. And it also shows that we're actually interested in what they have to say, what the person has to say, and we value their response. So, you know, we may kind of ask questions like, I'd like to hear about how you're feeling today. Or, and I'm going to just show you the next ones. Or we may use questions like, how's your day been? So that can't warrant just a yes or no answer. How's your day been warrants a kind of a much more open dialogue. Or help me to understand, you know, I'd really like to understand what you're trying to say to me, or tell me a bit more, you know, or, you know, you look upset. Can you just tell me, would you like to tell me a little bit about what's happening? So it's keeping in mind that these open questions allow a person to kind of elaborate on what's going on for them, whereas a closed question just gives an answer, yes, no, now, later, those sort of responses, which actually don't help us kind of get any more information out. So that's the first part of it. The second part is kind of really thinking about listening. And I love this, this symbol here, this symbol of the character of to listen. Because when we listen, we don't listen just with our ears. We listen with our eyes, with our heart, if you like, with our undivided attention, and actually even with our body, because it's a lot of body language as well. And I guess, you know, it's really interesting, you know, and I'd like you to put in the chat box, have you ever had those conversations with people where, you know, you're saying something to them and you can see they are kind of listening, but you sort of know that they're not really listening. So they could almost repeat it back to you, but you kind of get a sense that they're not really listening with their sort of heart, with their full attention, with their whole kind of being. So think about when that's kind of happened to you, you know, when they look like they're drifting or distracted. How does that feel? How does that feel when they're in a hurry, they're looking at their watch, maybe they're looking at their phone? How does that kind of feel, if you're willing to put in your chat box, if you've had an experience of that, talking to someone and they just look like that they're, you know, really distracted or drifting, or yeah, somebody saying this feels like there's no point in talking. Yeah. I particularly find it frustrating. I don't know about all of you, because, you know, I've had those conversations with people where if I say, repeat back what I said, I can see that they can repeat 100% what I've said, but they've actually not quite taken it in. And it is kind of really, it makes it feel really pointless. It feels frustrating. Somebody's written, you'd rather deal with it yourself. Yeah, yeah. So it makes you just kind of walk away, and there's no point in actually approaching someone to kind of talk about it. What else happens? You know, what else comes up for you if you're you notice that that person really isn't paying attention and isn't really listening? Anyone else like to share? So you feel less confident to tell them something next time? Yeah, you become, absolutely. So it's a kind of, you lose trust in effect. You feel less confident, because if somebody is actually kind of listening in that quite a distracted, unconnected way, it's really hard to have confidence in them. It's really hard to believe. Remember, we talked about those three areas of making connections, which was about kind of genuineness, empathy, and an acceptance. And it's really hard to believe that exists when somebody's actually kind of all over the place and not really genuine and not really empathic and not curious or interested. So absolutely. So, you know, they're kind of it's really hard when people kind of behave like that. So as we say, it's not just what we say, but it's the way we say it as well. It's not what, you know, you just say, it's the way you say it. So it's all about as well kind of body language. It's your posture, it's your voice and tone, it's kind of the volume you say things in, it's kind of gestures, eye contact, and personal space. So it's really kind of important to, and that's why it's so important, we said, to make the time and make the space in order to be able to really engage in that listening, and to be able to do that with genuineness and empathy. And often, you know, we'll show that in sort of our whole body language and eye contact and our voice and our posture and everything. And I think people do pick that up, and especially when people are really struggling with a lot of kind of mental health difficulties or mental health issues, they become very sensitive actually to other people's kind of responses to them. They become overly sensitive. So it's really important that we actually kind of convey that, you know, we are genuine, we are empathic, and we are accepting. And that's not to say, and we're going to talk about that later, that's not to say you can do this all the time, because there will be times where you've got to put yourself first and you can't offer that kind of support or offer that listening, and that's okay too. And so we're going to also talk about that in a moment. I've noticed someone's just put something in the chat. Any advice for adapting this to digital communication in today's environment? Yeah, and I guess when we're looking at digital, if that's to do with, if we're using kind of Skype and visual, obviously people are going to notice that eye contact, and they're going to notice our facial expressions. So in that sort of communication, they are going to see that. And in fact, it can be actually a lot more intense when we're doing it online, because it's so kind of much more, I guess, in your face, if you like, and one-to-one. And that can be quite intense, but it can also be very powerful. If we're doing it, say, on the phone, and we're not actually visually seeing someone, then again, it'll be the tone and the volume that we adapt. So, you know, if we're kind of really abrupt, or, you know, hurrying people along in our tone and talking really loud and quite kind of sharply, that's going to kind of come across. Then when we kind of notice, you know, when people on the other end of the communication notice that we're actually, our tone is really kind of gentle and warm, and so, you know, we're kind of conveying how we're sort of giving those messages across. But yeah, it's a good point. It is much harder, you know, when we're kind of doing this kind of in this world today, you know, when we're doing so much of it kind of online and digitally. But it is still there, and I think it's still really important to be aware of. But yeah, thanks for bringing that comment up. That's a really good point. So again, so we're going to go, but, you know, we're kind of toing and froing about kind of the sort of questions we're asking, how we kind of listen. So we're going to listen. So we're listening, as we said, you know, with our whole, you know, ears, heart, you know, our bodies, and, you know, and in sort of that kind of bigger way. But then we also can show how well we've listened with this reflective listening. And that might also answer a question in this kind of digital age, how we convey that we've actually listened. And reflective listening is a really good, like a powerful skill that does take some practice, but can be used to amazing effect. And this is when it will come into its own if you perhaps on the phone, or even kind of, you know, on a Skype session or a Zoom session. And what it does is it really allows for misunderstandings and misinterpretations to be corrected. And it's really based on that active listening to what is being said. And it's not just what's being said, but kind of what's underneath that. And that's what really shows we're listening. So it's the process of kind of reinstating what's been said in kind of your own words. So it's providing that proof that you've actually heard and understood. We're going to reflect some of the emotions, you know, that support emotional intelligence, but also to show that we've kind of registered some of those emotions that are coming up in that conversation that we feel that person might be experiencing. And that kind of builds that trust and provides further opportunities to talk. And now, if we weren't on Zoom and we didn't have so many people, you know, maybe, and we had the time, it would be useful to break off and try some of these skills. But I'm hoping that you'll have a copy of this this recording, and you'll have a copy of this PowerPoint, and you might be able to go off and practice that, you know, with some of your friends or your other peers as well. So reflective listening is kind of like understanding what they're saying, listening for the emotion underneath, and listening to kind of what you understand, and trying to kind of check that for the accuracy by kind of repeating things back in your own words. So you might say things like, you know, so it sounds to me like you're saying that this is really upsetting for you and you're not coping. Or you might say things like, you know, so let me check if I've understood. You've said that this is really, you know, you're really struggling with this and you feel like you're not coping. So it's pointing out those sort of things. You know, it looks to me like you're feeling really anxious about this. You know, can I check, you know, what it is that's making you feel so anxious? So it's sort of listening to them, but listening more than just what they're saying to you, you know, really noticing, you know, so it sounds like you're feeling like you're trapped in this particular situation, and you could do with a little bit of guidance or support. You know, it's those sort of things. So it's really showing that we've understood. So it does take practice, but it's also really, really a powerful tool, and does build that kind of trust in, you know, that person in you. Sometimes we have roadblocks to listening. We're all human, you know, we all kind of have things going on in our life, and you know, and that's natural. But it's really useful, again, to be aware of some of these roadblocks. Sometimes you might feel upset, you know, and that's what I said. Sometimes you just can't listen and you can't deal with other people's stuff because you've got your own things going on, and that's absolutely okay, because actually, you know, self-care is really important. You know, our theme for the last mental health day was you can't pour from an empty cup. So you need to actually keep yourself well and safe before you can offer kind of support to others. So if you are feeling upset, it's okay to say, you know, I'd like, you know, I can't do this now. Could we find another time? Okay, because it's difficult to listen reflectively if you're upset. You may empathize too much. So true empathy is, when you kind of want to step into someone's shoes, or when you can, but sometimes we can empathize too much, especially if it's triggering us with something that actually has happened to us too. And so we stop hearing what they're saying because it's kind of feeling a little bit too close to home. And again, you know, it's okay to say, you know, I'm sorry, I can't, you know, support you in this. Can I just suggest that you talk to perhaps one of my peers and colleagues, and we can kind of talk about that later. Rehearsing's an interesting one, because even though I'm telling you something about reflective listening, you know, sometimes if we're already rehearsing in our head how we're going to reflect that, then it can feel a little bit like we're only half listening, you know, and so it feels like we're not truly listening. And that's why sometimes this reflective listening is useful to practice kind of with friends or peers, just to kind of get a good feel of it, because it does eventually come naturally, and probably many of you do it anyway without realizing. So, you know, being, aware of these things. So sometimes you might be disapproving, like we talked about earlier, being aware of your filters on the world, your frame of reference. You know, you might end up being a bit disapproving because of something you don't agree with what they've done, and to be able to put that on hold, you know, or disagreeing with, maybe their perspective on something. It's sometimes that can really block us to actually listening, you know. And if we're aware of it, then, you know, sometimes we can actually overcome that and actually listen. If we feel like we can't, then it's a good time to kind of step down and perhaps, speak to someone, or ask them to speak to someone else. So, you know, it's all of those things, just being aware of where you're at. So another useful skill in our OARs, so, you know, we've looked at open questions, reflective listening, and so there's also summarizing. And summarizing it's kind of like summarizing the whole conversation. So we're listening. So when we're reflectively listening, we're just along the way, we're kind of throwing things back at them, going, okay, so it sounds like, you know, you're struggling here. Okay, so, you know, did I understand that this is what happened? Have I got that in the right order? And then you say it. So that's the reflective listening. But summarizing is summarizing kind of the whole conversation, understanding the whole conversation. It pulls it together with what somebody has said, and shows that you've paid attention to some of the important elements of the discussion. So you might start with saying something like, let me see if I've understood. You know, you've said a lot of important things here, and I just want to check that I've understood all of this properly, so that perhaps, you know, we can, find a way forward, or work together to find a solution. And so then, you might end with, you know, have I got that right? Is there something I missed? Do you want to add anything, or have I misunderstood anything there? And again, it really demonstrates, that you're really, you know, empathic and genuine by kind of being there. And it shows that you've really listened and taken it in, and builds that trust, and builds that kind of confidence with that other person in you. So I think, you know, it's really useful. So again, you know, don't get too, I hope you're not all feeling too overwhelmed by all these different ways of listening. And as I say, you likely probably do a lot of this anyway, but it's just good to pay a little bit of attention to it, because it's kind of the way we talk and we steer conversations in that direction to get it, so that person can be a little bit more reflective, and we can understand a little bit more what might be the best way forward, where would we signpost, and how can we best support them. So, it's kind of having an idea about those sort of things. So again, having constructive conversations. I've just sort of put that in there as a summary about kind of some of the few things, just to go back and go over those few things we've just talked about. So how we speak to people is just as important as what we say. So it is the tone, the body language, it's the way we talk about things is just as important as what we're actually saying. Being listened to and understood is an important part of the process of change. So the fact that we're actually even there and trying to understand and trying to empathize and really genuinely listening also allows that person to contemplate any sort of change, to find ways forward. And also knowing that the person who has the difficulty, who has the mental health issues, is actually the person who has the answers to solving it. We're not experts in their situation. They're their own experts. But what we can do is help them kind of find those solutions. And people only change their behaviors when they feel ready to. So often, we can get frustrated because we can see clearly where those people need to do things to change, to help them move towards, something more helpful or better. And we kind of sometimes we want to really kind of shake them and say, come on, you've got to do this. But actually, often it gets people to, I guess, dig their heels in a little bit. So people will only change when they feel that they're ready to, not when we start pushing them and advising them and go at them like a bull. So, and in fact, the solutions people find for themselves and decide to kind of tend to are the most enduring and effective. It's not what we tell them. It's not, the advice we give them. It's usually solutions that they find for themselves actually are the most effective, finding that it's that empowerment, and feeling empowered kind of goes a long way, and it has much more lasting results. So one of the other things in kind of all of this, the oars, is this less is more as well. So we actually want to listen more and speak less, sort of thing. So we listen, the active and reflective listening. Show our empathy, understand with compassion, not sympathy or pity. Sometimes it's about sharing the bigger picture, and we're going to talk about that, like how much are we willing to share ourselves. But sometimes it's about looking at that bigger picture, about seeing the solution, because often people, when they're in distress or when they're struggling with mental health issues, really focus in on the actual issue and the problem, and they lose sight of the bigger picture and the other things in their life, perhaps the other support networks, perhaps the other things that are happening in their life that can kind of support them and help them. And then, of course, the other S is for the support, providing that calm and safe environment, providing them with a space that they can come and talk to someone, and perhaps get that, signposting or support, or whatever, is decided is helpful. So it's sort of that less is more, not too much talking and telling them what to do in summary, but much more sort of listening, perhaps role modeling, that kind of calmness and being kind of, just calmness and empowerment, and that can kind of go a long way. And also these affirmations and praise. So, it's really important to also to praise and build confidence and motivation. Because often we forget that, because often we're so busy focusing in on the, on the issue or on their problem or on their mental health difficulties. And this is the idea about kind of pulling back and looking at that bigger picture. So again, I wonder if you could put, any of you in the chat box, if you're willing to just put in there, just so, break it up a little bit, give me a little bit of time not to talk so much. How might they be helpful? When have you had a time when maybe sort of an affirmation, or praise has been really helpful to you? Or when do you think it might be helpful? In what ways could it be helpful when you're talking to someone or someone's kind of turning to you? In what way, what are we trying to achieve with the kind of praising people and giving them affirmations? Anyone got any kind of ideas about that? Any thoughts? What is it that? So I've written here, you know, very self-esteem. It builds self-esteem and confidence, hope and self-belief. But yeah, so somebody's written to help them feel empowered, to be able to solve their own problems. Yeah, to show them that they have the ability to do so. Yeah, and it's when we kind of say that to someone, like, you know, in ways like, actually, you know, that's, you know, amazing what you've already done. Or, you know, we might say to them, you know, things like, I'm really pleased that you're able to open up. Then it makes them feel really empowered, rather than feeling like I'm the person that's broken and needs help. Actually, the fact that, you know, we're praising them for things like, you know, even reaching out or anything, actually builds some sort of a kind of a sense of confidence and self-esteem. So it gives them, you know, empowerment in their own, you know, solving skills, problem solving skills. Somebody said that to help them feel as though the situation they find themselves isn't forever. Yeah. And so again, yeah, when we kind of, you know, affirm and praise and look at the bigger picture, it helps them kind of see that this is just a small thing in their lives. There's other things actually that you know, are important, and this won't last forever. Yeah. And that's that building the hope. Somebody's put in there, this might not be as relevant to affirmations, but I find reassurance when I'm feeling anxious makes me feel so much better, like I'm not alone with my thoughts. Absolutely, yeah. So sometimes, so it's that kind of reassurance and affirmation. Some of it's about sort of saying, you know, that's okay. And I think, I hope this is what you're getting at. So this is what I'm interpreting, and I'm going to ask you this, so tell me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of that idea to say, you know, the old phrase, it's okay to not feel okay. So sometimes, you know, when we say that affirmation and praise and some of the kind of reassurance, it's about saying, I'm so pleased you're able to talk about this, because it is okay to not feel okay in this situation. And so, you know, it sort of builds that kind of confidence and hope and self-belief that actually, you know, I can do this. So, you know, and sometimes in affirmations and praise, it might be about that they might come back, these people, and say, you know, this is what I've done so far. And to be able to say, you know, I'm really impressed that this is some of the, you know, that you've taken this action, again, builds the self-esteem and confidence and those sort of things. So even to be able to pick out, wow, what have you done already? That's amazing. You've already done that. You know, that's great. And oh, I'm so pleased that you were able to come and talk to me about this. So here's some of the phrases. Thank you for those who shared. So here's some of the phrases that, you know, you might be able to use looking for the positives. You know, I'm really pleased you've been able to, that you've had the courage to tell me what you think about that. You know, it does take a lot of courage for people to open up to others, and to be able to kind of, you know, affirm that and look for the positives can be really empowering. You know, to tell someone that that takes a lot of courage can really kind of instill them with a lot of confidence. You know, and in the same way, you know, I value your honesty. It can't be easy to kind of talk about your feelings, because, as I said, we live in a society that says, you know, turn a frown upside down. And so to be able to pull out these green shoots, look for the positives and say, that's, you know, amazing that you've been able to talk about that and open up about that, you know, I think can really empower people, you know, or I really admire that you've taken your time out to approach me. So, you know, it's really important to pull that out, to not just be focusing in on just the issues, I guess, the problem solving and the issues. Somebody's written in, I gather that this is a slightly different situation, but when I'm praised for something I don't see as significant or praiseworthy, or if I'm concerned it's less than sincere, it can make me feel more worried or insecure. Yeah, and that's absolutely. And I think that the praise has to be, it's a difficult one, because the praise has to be very sincere, genuine. You know, it can't be just this rhetoric and, oh yeah, that's really good, you know, just because we're talking about it now, then I'm going to look for every bit of praise in everything people do. Absolutely, it can feel insincere. And it is really sometimes hard to hear that praise. And I wonder whether that's what you're saying, that if you don't see it as significant or praiseworthy, it's really hard to accept that praise. And that can kind of throw people off a little bit. But I guess it's the type of praise, because sometimes just to be able to say, you know, I'm so pleased that you've been able to talk about that, may not sound like praise, but is actually kind of empowering that person, instilling with confidence that it was, you know, helpful for them to come and talk and approach you. So I hope that sort of answers that question a little bit. But yeah, absolutely, as you know, as you know, welfare officers, or, you know, as kind of well-being, you know, officers or volunteers, it is about doing it when you genuinely feel that, and you know, so not just saying it for the sake of it. Somebody says, yeah, definitely something to look out for. Yeah, some of the praise, and you said, yeah, exactly. Somebody said to you exactly the same as Harry. Somebody said, sorry, exactly the same. And somebody said, yeah, it needs to be genuine. Same with compliments in social situations. Absolutely. And, you know, I think if it doesn't come from that genuine place, then probably it's best to not, you know, talk about it really. But actually, it's about having the confidence to notice that and say it, because there's a lot of times where it can be very empowering, because, you know, it really does take a lot of courage and a lot of even determination to come and talk about, you know, some difficulty with someone, you know, and ask for that support, to reach out. That's huge. So, you know, it's really important how we kind of relate that as well and talk about that. Okay, so using your own experiences. So, you know, stories are really important, and they get, you know, people to understand, you know, the real impact, and see things from a different perspective. So stories can really give people the courage to seek help, to speak up, and they can create an environment for change. So this is a quote by Adam Spreadbury from the Bank of England. So again, I'd like you to think of a conversation that you had with a peer that you found useful, and just sort of think back to, you know, just a brief conversation you found that somebody has actually a conversation recently you found useful. And if you're willing, and I know this is going to be hard because it might be a lot of typing, but if you're willing to write in the chat box just briefly about, you know, did the person share their experience, and did you find that helpful? So I'm wondering whether you can think back, as I say, to perhaps a conversation you've had recently with a peer, and did they share their experience, and have you found that when people share their experiences helpful? And if you're willing to write a little bit more, you know, that could be really helpful as well. So anyone willing to share that, you know, their experience, and times that they've found that sharing of an experience really helpful? It's sometimes really hard to think of something, because actually I was just kind of trying to think of, you know, something that maybe's recently happened to me, about where someone's shared their experience, and I think, you know, I'm trying to think of something that recently has happened to me about, you know, one of my friends really letting me down. You know, when we've kind of organized sort of going for a socially distanced kind of a gathering, and they've really let me down, and they've and it's really hurt, because, you know, sometimes, you know, I've started to think, oh well, you know, obviously they're not that interested in me, and my mind goes off in those usual things that our minds do. And I spoke to a friend about it, and a friend of mine started talking about how it happened to them as well, not that long ago, and how, you know, all of this distancing and this particular time is really difficult. And they were just telling me a little bit about how they dealt with it, how they just sort of were able to kind of rationalize it and put it to the side, because, you know, they thought that actually it was all about this kind of coronavirus situation. So, and it was really helpful, because it made me realize, actually, you know, maybe I was overreacting, because things are quite not as not usual, not functioning in the same way. So anybody else has an experience that, you know, that they've shared with a friend, and they've kind of shared that situation? So somebody's written, before presentations or running meetings, talking to my friend beforehand, who also maybe feels worried, unsure, makes me feel a lot better. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's about that knowing we're not alone in those feelings, I think, is what's really helpful about sometimes sharing our own experiences, to show people that you know, this isn't unusual. You're not crazy, or there's nothing wrong with you. But in actual fact, you know, it's normal to feel like that. Anyone else willing to share just, you know, anything about any conversation you've had with one of your peers, colleagues, friends, where they've shared their experience and you found it helpful? Okay, I'll keep the chat box open, and I'll hopefully come back to that if anybody else is willing to type anything else in. I'm aware that there's a lot to take in, and you know, a lot of sort of you know, talking and a lot of slides, but that's why I'm hoping to keep the chat open a little bit to kind of have your engagement, so you don't just completely nod off at the other end. So using your own experiences, you know, can be, as we said, you know, can be a powerful tool in communicating things like hope, creating connections with others. You know, it's a really powerful tool in kind of sharing our mental health experiences and providing us with the opportunity to practice what we've learned, role modeling how we can communicate like possibility and potential, and things like that. And again, someone was complaining about a mutual friend and the frustrating things they do. And I recognized I did similar things that might be equally frustrating with other people I knew. And it helped me to modulate my behavior. Okay, so sometimes with people sharing their experiences, it makes us kind of more self-aware of our own behaviors or of what we do. Yeah, absolutely. And so it can be really helpful, you know, when people kind of share things. And it does make us sort of also connect on a different way too. When people share kind of some of their mutual experiences, it makes us see that they're human as well. So thanks for that. So some of the benefits of sharing, we can demonstrate that people can continue to work and manage their mental health difficulties like their anxiety, depression, or other mental health problems effectively. It also encourages other people. So sometimes when we share our own stories, it also gets other people to open up about their own experiences. You know, how many of you have, if you have struggled with any mental health issues, which again, I'd be surprised if none of us have at some point, and, you know, struggled with some low mood, anxiety, stress, and those sort of things. And when we've been able to open up to other people and say, you know, I've really struggled with this, it gets other people talking, and it gets other people kind of communicating, you know, their own experiences. But what's important is there's always some questions to ask yourself. You know, what are the sort of things you might disclose? You know, it might be useful to look at what might be the benefits of self-disclosure and what might be some of the problems of self-disclosure. So it's really useful to ask yourself things like, why are you telling the story? You know, what do you hope to accomplish by telling the story? You know, will your story inspire that person? Is it about getting them to open up? Is it about showing them that you empathize? You know, what do you feel comfortable with sharing? Because it's not about having to share everything, you know, thinking carefully and deciding what personal information you're willing to share. What are you comfortable in sharing about, you know, and whether that's actually helpful to disclose that information in certain situations. And considering, you know, in what situations and in what ways might it not be helpful. So anyone willing to put in the chat box, when might it not be helpful? In what ways sharing your own experiences, in your own experience or when somebody else has shared it, has it not been helpful? Is anyone willing to kind of write in there when somebody's been sharing their own experiences, and when have you found it not to be very helpful at all? So somebody's written, you may take attention away from the other person experience. Yeah, making it about you. Absolutely. That's perfect. Thank you for that. And when it takes the focus away from the person you're trying to help. So both of you have gone straight to that. And, you know, I think that's really very aware, and that's brilliant. Yeah. So, you know, and that's one of my first things that I was going to say, is shifting the focus too much onto yourself and your own story and away from that person who is trying to kind of express their struggles. What else? Anything else that you think might be a problem when you are kind of disclosing what's some of the problems with self-disclosure, what are some of the problems maybe that might happen if you kind of sharing too much. Shouldn't compare experiences. Yeah, when the response is a similar experience, it's unique. Yeah, so sometimes we can kind of share that experience and just almost assume that, oh, the same experiences, so it must be the same kind of response to that. And actually, because we're so unique, our experiences are all going to be our own experiences, as will our responses to that, and how we emotionally and cognitively and behaviorally respond to that. So yeah, that's a really good point. And somebody's written, sometimes it can feel like turning into a competition, who has the worst. Yeah, whenever difficulties. Yeah, and I've had, everyone's difficulties are relevant no matter how small. Yeah, and I've had those sort of conversations. Yeah, well, you think you've got it bad, those sort of things. So that's a really good point. When we try and trump each other, that can happen too. So everyone's difficulties are relevant to them. And something that might seem small to us can actually seem huge to them. Absolutely. It's about respecting that. When it invalidates, somebody's written, when it almost invalidates the other person's feelings about their situation. Yeah, so we can share our experiences and we can almost perhaps say things like, well, I got over it and I did this and this. And it kind of maybe invalidates their struggles or how they're feeling because we haven't felt as bad about it or things like that. So yeah, that could be problematic too. And somebody, when they become worried about upsetting you by bringing up things they're finding difficult. Yeah, if they know that their problems also affect you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a really good point. So sometimes if you're already sharing your own experiences, then that person might think, oh, I better not share mine because that could trigger them or upset them more. Or so it actually serves to get them to withdraw rather than open up. So yeah, and I think all those things highlight how important it is to actually be really aware of why and for what purpose we're actually sharing our experiences in that particular moment. Some of the other things is that I've got here is sometimes, it might be that a person might be sharing their own experiences in order to release their own pain or work through their own issues, so rather than supporting, they're turning it around and kind of offloading as well. And sometimes sharing stories, some people might use them in order to steer that person into doing what I did in that situation. So, it can be a little bit kind of, I guess, trying to get them to do what you did because you think it's the right thing. So, maybe coercive or something like that. And sometimes sharing too much, so including real details about maybe perhaps trauma or very specific deep details might not be helpful to the other person either. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. But, I think you've all kind of really, a lot of you writing in there, I really appreciate it. And, you're very aware of what's going on. So, I mean, other things to kind of thinking about boundaries now. So, there's thinking about all the boundaries around even sharing your own experiences. So we really have to look at boundaries within your role and even just as a human being. So some of the things that are worth considering with boundaries are things like, time, putting boundaries around your time, knowing how much time you're willing to offer and you can offer in this role and the support you can provide. Confidentiality, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in more detail shortly, but it's being clear on what you can and cannot keep confidential, and the circumstances when things, may need to be shared elsewhere. Of course, being clear about what you can and can't do. So, usually your role is about signposting, not about counseling, not about being the therapist or even sometimes being their best friend or, being in that rescuer role. But it's about, perhaps listening, supporting and signposting, and thinking about those sort of things. So, being really clear about what you can and can't do, that the role has its limits, and it's about managing people's expectations, because if we do that, then people don't feel let down and don't feel hurt. So it's being really clear about that. And so it's about communicating the reasons for your boundaries. So excuse me, it's you know, perhaps being clear about your role. You know, your role as a welfare champion is to share information, promote awareness of how to keep yourself mentally well. So you might say things like that. Or, you know, and communicating the reasons for boundaries, you know, might be about, I'm not the best person to advise you on that, and I don't have the knowledge or the skills, you know, and it's not my role, and you know, I don't want to step outside my abilities as a welfare champion, and that might be really unhelpful to you because I might, you know, offer you the, you know, unhelpful advice. So can I suggest other sources of help and support? So it's really kind of explaining where you're coming from. It's not that you don't care, and it's not that you haven't got the empathy and genuineness and thoughtfulness, but it's about, you know, saying what your boundary and what your roles are. And a lot of that is about also protecting yourself, but also protecting the other person and managing their expectations. And it's also being really mindful about when boundaries aren't working. So, you know, identifying them when they're not working. So, you know, noticing perhaps, you know, when you're taking on a little bit too much, and trying to be a little bit aware of that, and when you need to take on less. And it was something we talked about earlier, you know, sometimes, you know, when we've got some of the blocks to listening, you know, noticing when we're too upset actually to help someone else, or noticing when we're getting a little bit too involved and we might need to step back. So it's that kind of reflecting on your role regularly can help you identify these things when you're taking on too much. So in short, really, it's like no advice or therapy is given, you know, only signposting, you know, perhaps, you know, maybe perhaps if you're willing to write in the chat box again, what other sort of things would you think are important in your boundaries, or other sort of, you know, things would you like to include in your boundaries, you know, that would form kind of some sort of a protection around you. So, you know, why are boundaries, what sort of boundaries are important to you? So any other boundaries that we haven't really kind of covered here, or anything else that anyone's got on their mind? Realistic expectations about response times, yeah, absolutely, because sometimes, you know, if they're emailing you or contacting you on some sort of a media, you know, social media platform or something, you might not be able to respond immediately. So it's also communicating that realistic expectations about response times. Yeah, and it's interesting because I noticed that you know, Liv has that written in there, that you know, it's flexible hours, and she will try to respond, but isn't always there 24/7, and so can't respond all the time. So I think that's really important too. Anything else? Any other kind of things that would be important for you to be aware of or include in your boundary setting? What about things like connecting on social media and things like that? How do you feel about that if some of these people that you're supporting ask to connect on social media? How would you respond to that? Is anyone willing to share anything or write anything about connecting on social media? Or, yeah, so somebody's written maintain a professional relationship. Yeah. And I guess that connecting on social media, you know, if you get a invitation on Facebook or something like that, it's about being able to politely decline with a message. It's about to say that, you know, again, it's communicating the boundaries and the reasons for boundaries. You know, my role prevents me from connecting to you in this way, as it's, perhaps you might write, as it's, you know, due to confidentiality issues that wouldn't be helpful to either of us. So things like that. Another one would be, what would you do, for example, if you bumped into someone that you've been supporting on campus? How would you feel about that? So somebody's been talking to you, you know, and kind of you've been signposting, you know, and they've kind of turned to you, and then you see them on campus, they're with their friends and you're with yours. What sort of boundaries would you want to put in place there for yourself and for the other person? Anyone have any comments about that? So I notice, I think a lot of people are running out of steam now. It's getting quite late in the day, and we've just got a few more things to get through. So anyone got any comment about what you would like to do, or what do you think would be the most appropriate thing to do if you bumped into someone that you've been kind of supporting and listening to, and somewhere, you know, on campus? It's probably less likely to happen at the moment, but so somebody's written, it's not really something you want to bring up in public. Yeah, so some of the boundaries would be to not talk about it in public, to not perhaps bring up some of the issues that they approached you with. Anything else? If it was someone you didn't really know, or you weren't really overly, you know, close to, what would you want to do? Somebody's written, avoid the question of how do you know each other. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, absolutely. How do you know each other's yeah, not a helpful question sometimes either. I wonder also, you know, sometimes as for us as counsellors, when we're kind of working with students and then we might bump into them on campus, what we do is that we only smile and respond if they approach us. And we keep contact brief. So we wouldn't actually approach anyone ourselves. If they approach us, we keep contact brief and we smile, you know, we don't avoid, but we wouldn't be the first one to make that kind of approach and you know, communication with them. And somebody's written, personally, social media is one of the main ways my society members would reach out to me, because I know them mainly from social events. Is this regarded as unsuitable? I guess, you know, that's a, if it's the kind of social media because it's part of your kind of the society membership, I think that's very different, I guess, than on your personal social media and having those kind of personal conversations, you know, perhaps on, you know, Messenger or Snapchat or those sort of things. So it is about, you know, trying to keep that separate, your social media society presence, if you like, and your own personal, private, you know, social media presence. I hope that answers your question. So, you know, no, it's not unsuitable as long as it's within those sort of boundaries. So I hope that answers some of the questions. Okay, so let's move on to confidentiality. So we have a bit of time for questions and answers at the end. So confidentiality. So first of all, I just want to kind of run through some of this. Sometimes people come up to you and just, you know, in a total, you know, a difficult place, very distressed and worried, and then they're just going to come up to you and just say to you, tell me what I should do. And again, this is going back to the rescuer, or the person who kind of empowers the other person in their relationship. And often people who are in a meltdown really just want to be told what to do. And actually that's not helpful, because when we tell those people what to do, first of all, it's not an enduring change, sorry. And second of all, it's offering our opinion. We don't really know exactly what their situation is often, and it can be really unhelpful. So it may be useful to do things like, so what are your options? What do you think are your options? You know, and if they say things like, I don't know, I've tried everything, you know, again, you might just ask them things like, you know, well, what has this happened to you in the past? And you know, what did you do then that's helped you? Or, you know, in similar situations, you know, what is it that you usually do when you're feeling overwhelmed, or when this has happened, or what do you think would help you at this time? It's useful in this moment to use the reflective listening tools. So sometimes just reflecting back to that person what they've said can get them kind of thinking about it, and almost getting them a little bit unstuck, because then they're hearing what they're saying and they're a bit like, oh, actually, yeah, I know I can deal with this. And sometimes you can use, you know, those solution focused questioning, things like, well, what sort of strengths do you have to deal with this? Or what would you advise a friend? I always find that really useful to kind of turn it around. Well, you know, what would you say to a friend if they approached you? Or even, who might be able to help you with this? What support have you got? Who could you ask for help in this situation? So it's just sort of being aware that even when somebody says, tell me what I should do, it's kind of being aware of not falling into that rescuer role, and trying to kind of turn it around and help them find their own solutions, because they will like I say, be much more enduring and go a lot further. So then sometimes it just gets stuck. Advice giving is just another one I wanted to briefly touch on. People might come in and say, can you give me your advice? Can you tell me what to do as well? And sometimes advice is necessary. And sorry, I'm just looking at someone's just written a comment here. Personally, social media, because I know the main, cool, I thought it was a good balance. Isn't it our role to suggest where they could ask for help? Yeah, signposting. Absolutely. And you can do that, on social media, but yeah, it is finding that balance, I think, between, kind of what you're sharing on social media and, and I guess what you're sharing and what you're suggesting and what signposting you're offering them as well, because as we know, social media, everything's kind of quite visible and out there. And so, yeah, I was just sort of, responding to something somebody's just been saying. I hope that sort of made sense. So when we do have to sometimes give advice, because sometimes somebody is really in a desperate place, it's about sort of maybe asking permission. May I make a suggestion? Or would you mind if I tell you one concern I have about your plan or about what you've just told me you're thinking of doing? And then we can kind of offer it rather than force it on people, the advice giving. How do I respond in a crisis? Sometimes people with mental health problems experience a crisis. They might break down in tears, they might have a panic attack, they might feel suicidal, or they might even kind of experience a different reality. So some people might even have a psychotic episode. So how do we respond? And again, these are just some things, some suggestions, because, this is about practice, it's not about perfection. We can't be perfect. You can only do your best. But here's just some things to think about. I mean, naturally, it's hard when somebody's actually really in a crisis situation and really distressed to not pick up on that distress and anxiety. But the best thing we can do is to try and stay calm. Take some breaths, try and stay calm. It's important to go back to those skills we learned, listen without making judgments, and concentrate on what we need to do in that moment. What are their needs in that moment? Asking what would help. So that's kind of really useful, asking what would help, and then reassure and signpost to practical information and resources. So avoiding confrontation. So it's not telling them what to do. It's not forcing them to go anywhere, avoiding, but just reassuring that, okay, I'm here for you. That's okay. I can show you where you might be able to get some support. How would this work? And trying to have that communication, asking them if there's someone that they would like you to, contact on their behalf, and encouraging them to get professional help, and again, signposting to that professional help. And if they have actually hurt themselves, making sure they get the first aid they need. So if they've self-harmed, making sure that they get first aid. You encourage them to go to the GP, or indeed you kind of help them clean their wound and look after themselves. Sometimes though, people are suicidal, and and it's about us not dismissing expressions of hopelessness, not trying to cheer them up or jolly them along and say, oh, it's fine, because sometimes we have to really take some things seriously. So when would we break confidentiality? So if you're worried that someone that you're speaking to is actually, really feeling suicidal, and it's about really, first of all, being really proactive in asking, okay, opening up that opportunity for discussion. And often people are really worried that if they talk openly about suicide, it's going to make it more likely to happen. And that's actually a fallacy. And in fact, it can be really helpful to actually get someone who's feeling suicidal to actually talk about it. Now, we're going to talk about it later. It may be distressing for you, and we're going to have to, it's about looking after yourself after that as well. But in the first instance, it's about getting someone to open up, actively asking if they're feeling suicidal, asking those questions, what their intentions are, and really just kind of checking out if there's a serious concern. If they do tell you that they're feeling suicidal, can't go on, then it's really important to encourage them to get help, and even offer to go with them for help, to get that help. There are times that they won't allow you to do that, and there are times that actually, you know, they're not even in the right place to be able to actually give you that permission, and that's when confidentiality may be breached. And so to start with, you know, give the person space to talk, you know, ask them if they've ever harmed themselves. Is there anything that anything that could help them prevent themselves from hurting themselves or thinking about suicide, and just really making sense of what's going on in their mind and how they're feeling. If you feel that actually suicide, they are at risk, then you can breach confidentiality. And, you know, and that may be then about also discussing it with, and later on, I think, I'm not sure if it's Emily or Liv are going to talk about it a little bit, about approaching people in the guild. But, you know, you always endeavour, first of all, to ask their permission and consent to breach the confidentiality. But if they're not willing and you think that their life is really in danger, then under exceptional circumstances, you can do that. And you can call the GP, the Student Health Centre, you can call 911, you can call the Samaritans. You can also take them to the A&E department, or when you call 111 and get advice, you might stay with them until an ambulance comes for them. You can call the State Patrol, because they can come and actually support you and help that person and take them to A&E. So there's all these ways that you can actually, on their behalf, actually, if you really suspect that they're going to take their own life, encourage them to get help. And if it really feels like they're not willing to seek help themselves, then you can do these things, contact these numbers, and you know, get them supported. So that's really important as well. There's also, I don't know how much in the Student Guild you kind of learn about things like, or in the societies, also about the Children's Act. And so if you're made aware that a child is in immediate danger or harm, then it will be useful to speak to someone in the guild. And I think you'll have the contact details hopefully shortly, but that's also kind of something to keep in mind if you're privy to some of that sort of information. But I think it's more important to really think about at the moment this, you know, situations where you feel that somebody may be suicidal or, you know, in danger themselves or to others. And I've just added these sort of slides that are kind of worth considering, just some ways to have that conversation. I've just noticed there's a few questions, so I'll just kind of have a quick look at that. So somebody's written, if somebody is self-harming but not to the degree that they put in themselves in mortal danger, is it still acceptable to breach confidentiality? So this will be a bit more obvious in these conversations, but usually no, because usually this is about when they're not in danger, it's about encouraging them gently to get help. It's about having those conversations to say that I'm really concerned and I would really like to, you know, help you to help yourself, or I'd really like you to, you know, get the support, because, you know, this isn't safe for you. So yeah, it's not confidentiality really. We break confidentiality really is if somebody is in imminent danger to themselves or to others. So I hope that answers your question. So in this first one, it's if there's really concern of risk of someone taking their own life, you can talk to them about their concerns. And sometimes even just showing them that you care can be a powerful tool to encourage someone to open up, talk honestly, and get that help that they need. So you could say things like, I'm really worried about you. I don't feel comfortable letting you leave right now. I would feel much better if I knew you're going to be safe this evening. I would like to call emergency services and see if they can do something, you know, so that you're okay this evening, you know, to make sure you're okay this evening, you know, and in that moment, you really don't have to ask permission, but of course, to keep the trust and keep the support going, it's good to have these sort of conversations. If you suspect that someone, you know, if you're concerned about someone but think emergency services are unnecessary, that they're talking about suicide but they haven't really made plans, and, you know, keep in mind this isn't up to you to assess and judge, but, you know, if you get a sense that actually they're talking about it but it doesn't feel that it's really that that that's necessary right now, the emergency services, you might just want to explore who else could support them in the evening, perhaps some friends or someone, a phone call that they can make. So you might say something like, I'm really worried about you. I don't feel comfortable letting you leave alone right now. I'd feel much better if I knew you were with someone that would keep you safe, or you would keep yourself safe this evening. What could we do? Who could we call? Who could we call now? Who is it that you'd feel comfortable spending the evening with? So those sort of conversations. And finally, which is more probably a little bit about what this previous question was about, someone perhaps self-harming, but not, at risk and of hurting themselves, really like taking their own lives. It's just about concerning about their safety, feel there's no immediate risk, but they could do with taking some steps towards getting support. It might be a conversation like this. I'm really worried about you, and I get the feeling that you're struggling right now, could do with more support. Have you thought about speaking to your GP? And you might even bring up, perhaps, the GP to talk about looking after your wounds and perhaps getting some psychological and emotional support, to kind of help you in this distressing time. So it's kind of thinking about those steps. So one of the things in summary, first of all, it's just kind of listening whether there is kind of very serious risk or harm that they might be bringing up, listening really non-judgmentally and giving some reassurance and information when it's needed, encouraging that appropriate professional help, and then also encouraging to get some self-help or other support strategies. So it's just kind of, in summary, we talk about this algae and looking after others. It's assessing for that risk of harm in a non-judgmental, empathic, genuine way, giving that reassurance and signposting and encouragement. It's quite a useful kind of a thing to remember. And of course, finally, self-care, being kind to yourself, if you get things wrong, or you don't, and I'm not talking about, this isn't just on the back of suicide or suicidality, it's on the back of just sometimes, feeling like you haven't said the right thing, or people not hearing what, or coming back at you and saying, you didn't help them. We're not perfect. None of us can get it right all of the time, and I think connecting to your intentions, why you chose to do this role, connecting to, what you said very early, some of you wrote very early on about wanting to support others, empower them, help people develop resilience, give something back. Share an understanding of your own difficulties and struggles, and perhaps help other people get through them. When we can connect to that's our intention, even if sometimes things don't quite go our way, then we can be kind to ourselves because our intentions are genuine. So, and sometimes maybe we can just talk about it. That's really important, to talk about it, perhaps with your student guild contact or with your peers, within confidentiality boundaries, and just to process maybe what happened and maybe how you would handle it differently next time. As I say, talk to someone, just as you would want to encourage conversations about mental health with those people that you're supporting, it's also important for you to take the time to have those conversations yourself. And also remember that you're not alone. You can contact Wellbeing if sometimes something's really difficult and triggering, and I'm going to show you in a moment where and how, and or you can contact obviously other guild staff to have those discussions, if you feel that that's really, quite difficult. And also just to bear in mind, if you feel others are not respecting your boundaries or unclear about, your boundaries, then, it's important to speak to them and to raise that, and to raise your concerns as well with the guild staff and other people. If you feel like some of your boundaries are being breached, even as hard as that you're trying to keep them in place. And so this final one is managing your own mental health and well-being. So, self-care is kind of one area in our lives that's really important, and sometimes ones that we kind of neglect. And so, having that, thinking about how you look after your own well-being. If you find some subjects, distressing to hear, or you hear about traumatic events, or some things are too close to your own experience, or even if you're feeling unwell, if you yourself are starting to struggle for whatever reason with some kind of, mental health difficulties, because it can happen to any of us and for no reason, there's no rhyme or reason to this sometimes, then, really encourage, I really encourage you to think carefully about how you look after yourself. Who would you reach out to? How do you nurture yourself and look after yourself? And so just in the last sort of chat box before we start questions, and I'll just run you through a little bit about some of the resources. Some of you just type in quickly, how do you nurture yourself and look after yourself? How do any of you, what do you do if things have been really tough and you've had to listen to some really difficult things, or even if a friend of yours has offloaded on you and that's hard, or you've had a bad day, somebody's saying some people meditate, have a pamper evening, lovely. So, might have a really nice pamper evening, read, go for a walk, do yoga, phone a friend. Okay, so you talk, face masks and Netflix and lots of food, nice. Go to the gym, wind down with Netflix, hanging out with friends, exercise, go running outside, get some fresh air, clear time to keep, have some time, space in your calendar that's just time for you to really kind of process stuff and look after yourself, So, there's some really good coping strategies, some really good kind of mechanisms of looking after your own well-being and, mental health. And I think that's so important in all of this. You're doing an amazing thing here, volunteering for these roles. But, when you think about, that metaphor, when you're on a plane and, the gas masks, the oxygen masks drop down, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put them on the people around you or on your loved ones, because if you pass out with lack of oxygen, you're not very helpful to anyone at that point. So it's really important to look after yourself. And somebody else has written, you do some Muay Thai with your society. Shameless plug. Okay, Muay Thai, good. That's a great plug. I think, that's go for it. I think we should plug all these great societies and things like that too. So, okay, so I am going to now open it up. I'm just going to quickly run you through, and in the meantime, let me just, actually maybe quickly, we've got, how long have we got? I'm just having a quick look. Okay, we've got about 10-15 minutes. So I'm just going to quickly run through these last bits of the PowerPoint, just some of the resources. I'm going to open it up to questions and answers, and hopefully put it back to some of the guild staff to talk to you maybe about who to talk to there when you need support. You might already know that. But accessing self-help information and online resources. So we have a lot of amazing resources. If you just go to that wellbeing website, exeter.ac.uk/wellbeing, you'll find a lot of self-help and peer support and online self-help. We have a lot of wellbeing approaches to COVID. So they're based on cognitive behavior therapy, sort of booklets on ways to manage fear and stress and things like that. Act for Life is based on acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's an audio guide that goes through different things, like looking at your thought processes, your response to emotions and things like that. Silver Cloud is another interactive online CBT program. Sleepio is about sleep. There's lots of cognitive behavior therapy. Our CBT2 team have put together lots and lots of workbooks. We have relaxation apps, mindfulness apps. There's so many resources there. It's really worth having a look. And I'm just showing you, this is what our page looks like when you go to the wellbeing, self-help and peer support. And so, there's the icon, the online self-help, which is where you find Silver Cloud and Act Online, things like that. We have another section, wellbeing apps. You can see where the workbooks are, the relaxation and mindfulness audios, and some of the lists of the peer support. There's also the My Wellbeing Toolkit, which is a really useful resilience toolkit that's on our website. We have Student Minds. If you go to Student Minds, has a wealth of resources. So there's things like transition packs and other support resources there. We have a lot of wellbeing workshops and courses that are running all the time. So if you look on our website, and you can signpost students to that, they can book to all of these things on My Career Zone. Stress busting, feeling anxious about presentations, managing perfectionism. We also have, if you look on our website, we also have webinars that we run. So we're going to be running a webinar about uncertainty and worry in times of coronavirus. And so we're always running webinars, recording them and turning them over. So if you make yourself familiar with some of our resources, it's a good starting point to signpost some of your peers that will approach you perhaps about some of the difficulties. And finally, of course, if some of the people that you speak to, some of your peers really are struggling, then do signpost them to us. They can make an appointment, they can, you know, they can make an appointment, and the first thing that they'll do is make a telephone referral appointment where they speak to a practitioner and discuss their concerns, and then they'll get signposted to some of our services, because we have from cognitive behaviour therapy to counselling, many kind of pathways that we can refer people down. So somebody's asked, people can signpost to the Positive Wellbeing Peer Support Group. Yeah, a student-led peer support group as well. Yeah, and that's a brilliant resource as well. And I'm not sure if that's on our wellbeing website, but I hope it will be. And if not, then please get in touch with me. We'll put it on there. But, you know, it's familiarising yourself of all these places and you know, where you can signpost people to. And our website also has, you know, lots of also national and local services for support too, if you have a look on our website. So just familiarise yourself with that. So, okay, so I am going to stop my share, and hopefully I'm going to open it up and allow you all to perhaps, I'm going to turn my video on and allow you all to ask any questions. I don't know whether you want to speak to you know, the team about, you know, the resources with Student Guild. Would that be a good point to quickly hand that over to you, Emily, as well?
Yeah, Liv,
Oh,
is your
Liv?
mic working?
Yes.
Oh, it's working.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so shall I hand it over to you?
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was incredible. Thank you so much.
I know it's very long, and I appreciate that all the people that stayed on. I noticed the numbers clicking down.
No, that's okay. A few of the people did say that they had to drop off for seminars and lectures and things like that. So honestly, thank you so much.
So yeah, I hope it's recorded and people can use the recording.
Yeah, it has been recorded. So we'll definitely share that around. And we've had quite a few requests to share that around as well. And thank you for everyone who's joined. And thank you, you know, the fact that you're here in this room means that you truly care about all of your members, and that's incredible. Yeah, so I think just to signpost to a few things, obviously Kathy signposted some great resources, but within the Guild as well, we've got Nightline, which is our phone-in service that is run by student volunteers. Is the number of that's on the back of student cards, isn't it, Em? Yeah, brilliant. So
yeah, on the back of student cards.
Signpost students to there. Also, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you are faced with an individual who comes to you with a welfare issue, obviously it's okay to have those conversations. And now after this training session, I hope you feel well equipped enough to be able to engage in those conversations if you need to. But remember that the first point of contact will be us and well-being. So if an issue arises, do not hesitate to get in contact with myself or any of the activities team, and we'll be able to support you. Because at the end of the day, you are only students. I was on committee for Footlights, which is a theatre society during my degree, and people did come to me with welfare issues, and I felt entirely out of my depth. So this is why this training is so important. It's so important you're here, and it's so important to seek help from us at the Guild. Another thing to flag as well is speak out. So often when issues arise, for example, we've had instances where someone's come to us and said, someone's reported an incident of harassment to me, what do I do? And we usually do signpost societies to report via speak out. So you can report informally, formally and anonymously, and then a dignity and respect advisor will reach out to you and then support you through a process, whatever that may be. So that's a good sort of service to signpost you to as well. Em, is there anything that you think is also worth flagging that I've not flagged?
I don't think so. I think you pretty much covered it. If you're not sure like just drop an email to activities and we can signpost you to the kind of the correct place to signpost. Or if you just want to have a chat, like we're here to have a chat. We're not trained in kind of well-being or anything like that, so we will direct you onto the right service for that. But if it's just a case of, you know, you've had a chat with someone and you kind of are feeling the weight of it on you and you want to get that weight off, you can come and chat to us about that. We're absolutely fine with that. But I think Liv's covered everything else.
And thank you so much for engaging in the chat as well, because like, I've sat in so many training sessions where no one actually gets involved. So that was really nice to see. It was really nice to hear everyone's opinions and ideas. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that too. Do you want to leave a few minutes for questions? Does anybody, I mean, and people can take off their mics now if you want. I don't know if you've got the capacity to, if we can, you know, yeah, so feel free to turn off your mic and ask any questions, and I guess we can all try and answer it as best we can if there are any for the last, I guess, 5 minutes or so. I'm happy to stay on for a little bit.
Or pop them in the chat.
Yeah, or you can pop them in the chat. Oh, somebody's in the waiting room. Does anyone want to ask any questions or anything they want to go back to? I understand it's a lot to take in, you know, and yeah, it's been a long afternoon.
In answer to your question, yeah, Sam, I mean, they can be. What would be really nice actually is if you guys fed back to us about how you found this training and what parts of it you may almost like want to develop further in the future. And Kathy, if you're happy to come back, and we could hopefully develop a training session, because I think it is important, especially in the world we're living in right now. Everything's changing so quickly. Because I think someone asked a question that was really useful around like, how do we adapt this to like a digital environment, which we're obviously in at the moment. So yeah, absolutely feel free to kind of suggest those things to us. Also, I realized I just read out someone's name, so we may have to cut that bit of the recording.
I did it once
Sorry,
as well.
Sorry to X person.
So when somebody's asking, when you were talking about confidentiality, I just want to clarify that everything is confidential and we believe that the student be in danger. Yes, it is. It's yeah, absolutely. And we're all bound by that confidentiality at the university, actually, even if you don't volunteer for these roles. So yeah, it is really important to, you know, not, yeah, it's kind of, because it's about the trust and also about, you know, the fact that things can be passed on and shared around. And I think it is particularly important because of social media and exchanging information on there. So yeah, it's really important to always hold that in mind. And somebody's asked, is it appropriate to ask another committee member for advice after someone's approached you without identifying who that was, or would that still be breach confidentiality? And actually, that's an interesting one, and it's a good point, because sometimes we do that even, I mean, obviously within wellbeing, we can kind of share, you know, information about students because we're all privy to that information. But sometimes we might go outside of, you know, perhaps to the community mental health team, and we have conversations that are a bit like this person that I know, and we kind of talk in a very generalized sort of way to ask for that kind of advice. So you can, and that's not a breach of confidentiality, because, you know, it's likely that that person won't be identified. You know, it's kind of just getting that general information and support, because it is important for you as well. So I don't know how it works in the Guild about for you with your confidentiality policies, whether you're able to share information about students within societies. So I guess I should hand that over to you, Emily or Liv.
Do you want to take that, Liv, or do you want me?
Oh, yeah, you. Sorry, I muted myself. If that's all right.
Yeah. So kind of, we won't share anything about other students with another student. So if someone comes to talk to us about something, we're not going to go and tell other students about it. We might talk about it within our team to kind of determine like the best course of action, but again, that's kept confidential. If you want to come and ask us about advice about a situation, you can. We usually just ask you to kind of be generic about it, unless kind of you want to tell us who it is. But if you tell us who it is and we have a concern, we've then got to kind of, it's our responsibility then take that forward if there is immediate danger, for example. But yeah, kind of we'll discuss it within our team, and like you can come talk to us generally, or if you want to tell us, that's fine, but we do have that responsibility.
Thanks for that. So it is kind of similar as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any other questions, anyone? So it looks like probably not much else. If anything comes up and you decide that you want to ask a few things, or and I appreciate that, Liv, if other things come up that people want more focus on, and Emily, I'm happy to kind of try and develop some things. The communication on social media, honestly, I think none of us were that prepared for it either, but so that might not be my expertise. I might be able to find people who could do that, who could give you sessions on that, but certainly I can come back with any kind of other sort of training or answers if you have any questions. But I guess my biggest advice with the signposting is familiarize yourself with our webpage, because there's so much information there. In fact, probably a bit too much and a bit overwhelming, but it's good to have that in your mind for the signposting, because you'll just pick up on little things and think, oh, actually that person might really benefit from this workshop or webinar or this self-help resource, or actually to contact wellbeing. And just to know and be able to say that is probably quite a powerful thing to have, because you're already kind of equipped to do those sort of things. So, but and I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, Liv, that I think these people are amazing who are volunteering. I think you all are. I certainly wouldn't have done that when I was at uni. So I think it's, and it is really necessary in this time. It's and supporting each other as peers is an amazing thing, and it's really helpful. So
yeah,
well done, all of you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And as Emily said in the chat, Em's going to pop this and share the recording around in the updates email, so feel free to share that to the committee members as well, so they've all got access to that information.
Okay, and I'm not going to listen back to it, to all my stuttering and so
no,
yeah.
you were fab. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and yes, be in touch, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Bye.
Bye for now. Bye.